Welcome everyone as we start to join the webinar tonight. Thank you for joining us. We'll get started here in a little bit. Thank you to everyone as we start to join the webinar. I appreciate you joining with us tonight. We'll get started here in a little bit. Hey, Justin, Jim, and Katrina, we'll give it another about 2 minutes here. Let some more parents start to filter in, and then I'll start to kick things off here. Okay, I think at this point the participants are starting to slow down. I know last time we did this, they kind of started to filter in once we got started. So I'm going to start to kick things off here. Hello everyone, Unionville community. Thank you for joining us for our second Unionville High School College webinar series, the second session to the series here. I'm very excited that we have some great representatives from different colleges and universities to join us tonight. My name is Bob Findora. I'm one of the school counselors. If you were able to join us last time for the first session of the webinar, you know, I kind of facilitate the night here. And as some of the students jokingly said to me, I act a little bit too much like a game show host at these things. So we'll see if I get the same jokes after tonight's over. Just to let everyone know, we cannot see your faces out there. We don't know who's out there necessarily as far as participants go. But this is recorded. However, nothing from your standpoint out there in the community will show up on this recording. But we do like to record these sessions for families that may not be able to join, whether it's work or sports or clubs or you know, musicals and all different types of activities at Unionville High School, despite the pandemic that they're working through. So just to give everyone an overview before I start to introduce our representatives from the different colleges and universities tonight. Essentially, we have three different topics here tonight that we're going to discuss. Information about writing a college essay. We have information about financial aid, and we also have information about test optional. And we'll wrap our night up with that. Just to give you a little bit of an overview of what it's going to look like for those of you that may not have joined us last time. Basically, we'll have our different college representatives present for a little bit on the particular topic. And give us some background information and kind of dive into some of the foundational information on that specific topic. And then once we start to wrap that up, you know, all of you out there in the Unionville community are welcome to utilize the question and answer button at the bottom. Okay, you can use the question and answer button at the bottom, and or I'm sorry, the chat button at the bottom, and you can actually ask questions as we go through tonight. And we have counselors, Unionville counselors working behind the scenes to kind of organize some of those questions as they come in. So just know that, you know, as the topic is being discussed, you can ask a question at any point, and hopefully by the time we get to the question and answer portion of things, you know, I'll try to facilitate that and have some of your questions answered by the different college reps and some of the information they'll be able to touch on in the Q&A part after they do a little bit of presenting. So again, please utilize that chat portion if you have any questions that come up, and we'll see what we can do about getting you some answers here tonight to some of your questions. And again, this will be recorded throughout the night, so we'll be able to you know, put this up on the Counseling Center website within the next few days for individuals in case you have to pop in or pop out as we go throughout the night. So a couple points that I want to bring up before we really get started. First and foremost, I'd like to thank Justin Webb, our district technology guru, to help put this together. Organizing all these individuals and putting the technology portion of things is not easy. And really, Colleen Miller, one of our school counselors, really kind of organized getting this night together also. And we're going to have some assistance from all of the counselors behind the scenes. And I'd also like to thank all of you in the community, to participate in this. I jokingly said to all of our admissions rep here, I think last time we had, close to 150 or so participants that came to our webinar last time. And not to put all of you on the spot, Justin and Jim and Katrina, but I will say we're going to send out a feedback form when this is over, and we'll also send up the link to that feedback form to see what we can do to improve. Not to put pressure on you, but I did have one family actually contact me and said, hey, this was really smooth and we got a lot of information. We actually sat down as a family at the dinner table and we projected your face on the screen on our brand new 70-inch screen TV. So just to let you know, there may be some of that going on tonight, not to put too much pressure on you. So I do appreciate that. But hey, listen, I'll let each of you, once we get to your topic, give a little bit of background and biography on yourself once we get to your different topic. But for the sake of introductions, I would like to just get everyone so the community knows whose faces are what schools and what topics. We have Justin Ledesma here. Justin's worked closely with our high school for years, doing a wonderful job discussing the topic of college essay tonight. He's from Villanova University. The second topic, in the presentation will be from Katrina Kelly, who we've worked with also from West Chester University. She'll be discussing the financial aid portion of things, towards the middle of our webinar here. And then lastly, last but not least, of course, Jim Van Blunk, and Jim's worked for years with us and has done a wonderful job. And Jim's from Temple University, and he'll be discussing the test optional portion of things, which I know, Jim, we've got a million questions on, and even a couple questions during the last webinar about that particular topic. So again, that's kind of a lot for me to get things kick-started here, but Justin Ledesma, Justin, I'll kind of kick things over to you if you can give a little bit of background and then hop into your discussion here on your particular topic. And again, once we go through here and we get a little bit closer, I'll start firing some questions towards the end, okay?
All right. Thanks, Bob. As everyone can see, I've shared my screen, so I have this presentation that will help us out as we go through this conversation about the essay. And again, to introduce myself, I'm Justin Ledesma, one of the senior assistant directors in the Office of Admission at Villanova. And as Bob mentioned, I've been doing this presentation with Unionville for quite some time, and we have a great relationship. I was pretty pleased to know that last year 35 of your seniors applied for spots at Villanova, and we're very fortunate to have 5 of your recent graduates running around our campus these days. So always excited to be here virtually in this case right now. I've been working in college admission for almost 20 years, about 19 years now, come July. So I do think I have some experience, some perspective I can share with you. And we are wrapping up our review process. And since November, I think I've read close to about 4,000 essays. So I do think I have a few things that I can share with you when it comes to this process. So when I talk about the college admission essay, I think a pretty common reaction from high school students is a lot of anxiety, putting down these very important thoughts on paper for other people to review and potentially judge, whether or not you can be admitted and be part of that school community. So as I talk to students, I find that, one of those big steps is, getting started. And I think if you get an understanding that everybody is in the same boat about, trying to figure out what they want to do, I think that alleviates a little bit of stress. So I think it's been a couple years since we've checked in with Haley and Claire Dunphy from Modern Family, if you remember that show. But if you took a look at some of those earlier seasons, Haley was going through that admission process. And I think if you take a look at her journey, you might find some common ground. So let's see what she has to say about it right here.
I can't do this.
Why are you so frustrated?
Because I've never had any obstacles to overcome.
Oh, honey, that's not true.
Really, name one.
Well, you're lactose intolerant.
Oh, dear college, cheese makes me gassy. See you in September.
Sweetie, you're not really starting your essays, dear college, are you?
What difference does it make? I've lived a boring, sheltered, pathetic life.
I am sorry we have made things too easy and comfortable for you.
Oh, you should be. It is all your fault. You have shielded me from everything interesting and dangerous.
You are blaming me because I kept you from getting hurt.
Gabby's mom's a hoarder. That essay practically writes itself.
All right, well, so what can we take from that? So obviously you do not want to start your essays with Dear College, but I think a lot of advice, you can take a look at some great writers, Ernest Hemingway being one of them, and he addressed this idea with a lot of people, trying to deal with writer's block, that if you start off writing one true sentence, I think that's a really great place to start. So write the truest thing that you know, and I think that's a good way to kind of introduce this whole topic. Now, as I talk about the essay presentation, I've always promised people who've sat in on this that we're going to try to do two things. The first thing is to remove stress when it comes to this college admission process. And I would like a lot of students to look at this essay as a fun exercise in self-discovery, learning more about yourself and how you can fit into different communities. And I think if we take a look at it that way, that does remove a little bit of stress from this process. The other thing is I'm going to give you a lot of advice, and part of that is to start sooner as opposed to later. And if you do these things, you will enjoy September through December of your senior year a lot more. And I think when students know that, they can really get behind what we're going to talk about. So with this presentation, this is how we're organized here. We're going to examine this question. We're going to look at why we include an essay as part of this college admission process. We'll take a look at structure and length and what people will suggest. We'll give you some ideas as to things that you may want to include and avoid when it comes to your admission essay. And then a fun exercise in creativity. We're going to show you a bunch of different essay prompts schools have asked over the years. And hopefully that will get your creative juices flowing and maybe give you some fun homework assignments to work on when it comes to just addressing different questions schools may ask. So jumping into that very first question, why do we include an essay as part of this process? I think first and foremost, we're trying to measure a skill that you've been working on for the last several years, and that is your ability to write. Now, at Villanova or any other college, I think we hope to look at our graduates and we hope that you become leaders in your chosen field. So if that's accounting or engineering, nursing, or whatever it may be, again, we hope that you become leaders. And I think a part of being a good leader is your ability to communicate. That happens verbally, but in many cases that will happen in what you put down in paper or what you put down in an email. If you're going to change a process for your team of accountants or nurses, you're not going to find every individual and verbally relay that information to them. You're going to send that memo off, you're going to send that email out, and I think how you communicate that information will help you make these changes in a very seamless way. And I think that is part of being a good leader. If you want to take this ability to write a step further, I think that's your ability to think critically. And when many students look back at their middle school years, and if you were asked to do a book report, if you summarize the plot for your teacher, I think in most cases that was all you needed to do. But if you can take that a step further and talk about your favorite characters, make predictions about the future, or draw comparisons to things that seemingly are unrelated, I think that's something that you can really wow an admission office with. So it's not a required component of the admission essay, but I think if you can do it, I think it's a pretty cool thing to make happen. I'll give you an example. Every now and then, a student has talked about what they've read in Shakespeare's Hamlet, and they related that to what they've seen in The Empire Strikes Back. And if you can do that, I think that is something I would find pretty impressive. Now, of course, this will give us more insight into your personality. Now, if you're an athlete who loves to play basketball, or if you sing, if you dance, if you act in your plays and musicals, this is your chance to give us some reasons why you are so passionate about these things. And this gives us better ideas into how you can fit into our communities at our different schools. So I think that's another thing that we try to do. And of course, you can make relations about yourself to that particular school. So I know it's been tough to visit colleges and universities in the midst of the pandemic, but if you do get a chance and you're walking around Washington, D.C. and learned this about you. This is something about me, and this is why we're a good stepping foot on your campus. So I think those are some things that you can look at with why there's a college essay, and you can sum all that up with this statement here. That we in the admission office, we're very interested in what you have to say, but we are going to spend some time on how you go about saying that. So for some students, I think, this deals with organization, spelling, grammar, punctuation, all those great rules that your English teachers have been teaching you for the last several years. For some of you, this can come very easily, but for other students, I think you have to really work on it. But I would say that when we see that finished product, when we see your finished essay, they should look about the same way in these specific terms. So for some of you, you may have to use your resources, your counselors, your teachers, your parents, your friends who are very strong writers, and make sure that we don't have to pull out a red pen and make some of these corrections when we read your essays. So that's a pretty important idea. Now, I used to critique this one idea with students, and I used to tell students that we want you to focus on this idea of critical thinking, critical writing, as opposed to storytelling. But what I've found over my early years in admission is that a lot of students were very good at making very solid points through storytelling. So I've amended this idea that I want you to focus on critical writing and not so much the idea of movie making. And what I mean by that is that if I had to critique one thing about students and their essays, it's as though they're trying to send me a movie script, and they include these long strings of dialogue as if they're writing a script. They're overly descriptive about how blue the ocean is during their family vacation, when that actually has nothing to do with what's the question that's being asked. So I would encourage students to go about this as they're writing a paper, not making a movie. So, keep that in mind as you go through this process. Now, you may be familiar with this concept here, the 5-paragraph essay. And of course, the most important part of this is your thesis statement, because this helps me understand what you're talking about in the rest of your essay. And I will tell you that I read your essays a couple of times as I go through this process. And the first time is very quickly because I'm hunting down your thesis statement. I want to help, this helps me understand what's going on in the rest of your essay. And if you want to stick with the rest of this format, you have 3 supporting paragraphs, and at the end, you restate your thesis, and this is your chance to finish up with your conclusion and finish with a strong, decisive statement. Many folks have stopped me here and asked, what exactly do you mean by a strong, decisive statement? And I like to back into that, and I like to show you some weak, indecisive statements on the other end of this. And we'll start here with Mr. Al, who we will get into in just a moment. But every now and then, I will read an essay, and I am sometimes reading these essays very late at night. And I say to myself, this student is hitting all their points. They're doing a very solid job, but they may be in a very similar boat that I am in right now. They're trying to finish this essay at 1 o'clock in the morning or whatever it may be. So I think that's why, in my mind, I picture you just being very defeated and you're slapping on this very generic ending of your essay right here. And sometimes that looks like this: well, only time will tell, or this is all a question that we need to answer ourselves. And I would tell you that I'm always very frustrated with that ending. And I'm always compelled to look up your phone number right there and call you up and ask you to what the answer is that you wanted to provide on this essay topic. I haven't done it just yet, so don't worry about that. So I would just encourage you, if you're looking at these as weak, indecisive statements, that you swing in the other direction and you finish strongly. You put your opinion out there and you finish in a strong way. So let's get to Mr. Owl. He has another great example of a weak, indecisive statement. Every now and then a student will finish this way.
Mr. Owl, how many licks does it take to get to the Tootsie Roll center of a Tootsie Pop?
Let's find out. 1, 2, 3.
How many licks does it take to get to the Tootsie Roll center of a Tootsie Pop? The world may never know.
Yes, every now and then a student will finish up with the world may never know. And that's not the best way to really close off these statements that you're putting forward to colleges. Okay, so when it comes to formatting, a lot of schools will tell you exactly what they want to see. And in other cases, they won't be very specific at all. And I used to say this, 1 to 2 pages or about 500 words. But in very recent years, I've seen more and more colleges pushing more towards the shorter essays. And Villanova has certainly joined that crowd. We used to ask for about 500. We've asked for 750 in years past, and now we're asking for about 250 words. So it might be tougher for you to, do 5 paragraphs in 250 words. I would say you're just going to adjust, and you'll have your intro and your conclusion, and maybe you have one supporting paragraph for your essay. But yeah, that's what we're aiming for right now. And I put these other bullets in here very selfishly because I would tell you, if you use 1-inch margins, if you double space, if you use a very readable font like Times New Roman, 12-point size, it's very easy for me to read your essay. So that's why I would tell you to stick to those ideas. And if you do 500 words, it's going to look about like this. So that's what you're aiming for. And I think some students are always very surprised, and they say 500 words is about 2 pages. I thought that was a six or 7 pages. No, it's not. You actually have to be very judicious in word choice when you're working with 500 words. And now, even working with 250 words, you're looking at about 1 page to put all of your thoughts down. So that's what you're working with in that case. So I would tell you the 5-paragraph format is a good way to go about your essay, but it is certainly not required. I've talked to many students who've said to me, I find the 5-paragraph format very formal. I'm kind of an informal guy. I'm very, funny. I try to do different things. And I think that's totally fine if you want to keep out of this format. But here are some reasons why you would want to do it. I would just tell you it's going to help you keep organized, and it's going to help you make an argument if that's your goal of, showing off your critical thinking skills. We see your line of logic and how that flows and everything like that. I would tell you it's going to force you to be concise. You can't drone off into random tangents. And if I would tell you one thing you definitely want to avoid as you write your essays is writing aimlessly. If you know you have only 5 paragraphs or 3 paragraphs to work with, it's going to force you to stay very focused. And I think this is all good reasons why you would want to stick to that. But again, you don't have to do that if you don't want to. So moving on to these ideas of things that you may want to avoid when it comes to the essay, I'll start off with excessive dialogue. We kind of alluded to this already, and I have seen students include very long conversations like this one right here in their essay. And I will tell you that the student in this particular example didn't help us out by explaining that I said this part, my teacher said this other part. And I'll summarize a little bit. The student didn't understand the concept that was being reviewed in the classroom, but through further conversation, the student starts to understand what's going on. And it's a very long conversation. I would say it takes the student a very long time to get to the actual point. And if you only have 1 or 2 pages to work with, if you cut and paste this into Microsoft Word, you can see here that we've eaten up a good chunk of what you're allowed to use already. So I would tell you, using a long conversation like this is not the best use of your space or time. And I have a better example here. This is just 4 words from the conversation, and then the student takes over and explains the rest. I have bad news. That's what the mom said in this conversation. And the student explains it's not just any bad news, it's the worst news that one can deliver. So I think this is a more powerful example of the use of dialogue here, and it's only going to use up this much space when it comes to your allowed space when you write your essays. Okay, so some students have kind of pushed back on this with me, and I'm always very interested to hear your perspective. And I asked them, well, why exactly do you want to use this conversation? Students have told me, well, I want to provide more context for the situation. There is a lot of emotion in this conversation. I want to address that and make you feel that, and I want to put you on location. And I would respond and tell you, these are all great things to do when you're trying to make a movie. And as we mentioned, we're not doing that in this particular case. And my rebuttal would include these ideas. We already showed you it takes up a lot of space. And I would tell you that, as you remember these conversations, you have the benefit of being there. You can remember the funny way your friends gesticulate when they're really excited, the different things your mom does, when she's trying to tell you to do something. And it may sound very funny to you as you're putting it down on paper, but it is very difficult without actors and special effects and all these things to convey these funny ideas on paper when you're writing an essay. So I would tell you these are reasons why you don't want to include these sections of dialogue. So when it comes to negativity, I talk to students, in person every now and then, and they will tell me all sorts of great things about their school experience. But for whatever reason, every now and then, a student will decide to, grind an X right in front of me and tell me about this terrible experience that they had with their chemistry teacher or whoever it may be. And every now and then, a student decides that they want to write about it. It's as though they're putting their Yelp review into a college admission essay. And I will let you know, I'm not sharing this with anybody else besides me and the rest of the admission committee. We're not calling that teacher up. So your goal of revenge, it's falling rather flat in this case. So I'll give you this other example of my very first year where a student had this disagreement with a teacher about a missed assignment. You can see, I received a 0 in the assignment. This resulted in the first B in my life ever. Pretty tragic, right? And the essay topic we were asking students to address was talking about transformational experiences. And you can see the last words the student decided to leave with us. I was transformed on that day, now fully understanding that there are tyrants in this world and that life is just not fair. I got to tell you that, most people would agree that you're going to get a lot more traction with people by being more positive as opposed to being negative. And, there are some things that, we would generalize about this student here, that you may complain a lot. You're not taking a lot of ownership, about things. And you might not be the type of person that we want to be a part of our community at Villanova or any of these other schools. So again, try to be more positive as you go about your essays. Here's an example of things that you may want to include. I think sometimes students find a very specific way of writing and they stick with that. And if this is a lesson in music, you can see these 5-word sentences at the very beginning are one note, but we're encouraging you to kind of vary things up, to change it up. And you can see how it's a little bit more interesting to see, what happens in these second and third paragraphs. So we would encourage you to vary your types of sentences that you're using. Now, here's a big one. A lot of people would tell you that this is a no-brainer. Obviously, you don't want to swear in your college admission essay, but every now and then I've talked to a student who tells me they want to be the next great American novelist. They would love to write something like The Catcher in the Rye. And I know this is something that's hotly debated with a lot of people. Before we introduce a book like this to high school students, should we clean up the profanity that's in it? I would just say it's not going to be the same story. So I try to approach this in an open-minded way and really see, if the profanity that you're using in your essay really adds to what's going on. And I would tell you, I've seen it a couple hundred times over the years, and I would say in every single case, it just has been more distracting than helpful. So that would be my take on it. I would also share with you that some of my colleagues, their end of it is that they would automatically deny you or waitlist you on your use of profanity. So it is a pretty big risk to take by trying to use those specific words in your essays. And I would say this is a lesson in vocabulary, that you can convey this realism, you can convey, the anger or whatever you're trying to put in that essay by using, the full extent of your vocabulary and not using those profane words in your actual essay. Because again, that's a pretty big risk to take as you're applying to these schools. Now, for those of you who would include yourself among the very strong writers at your school, perhaps you write for the school paper or yearbook or in some other way, sometimes you've been tempted to dazzle, your English teachers or your readers with really complex sentences. So as you take a look at this paragraph, and let me correct myself, this is not a paragraph, this is one sentence right here. And believe it or not, grammar experts have taken a look and have said, well, technically this is grammatically correct. And though this may be grammatically correct, why would you ever put a reader through this type of torture? So the challenge here is to find the simple subject, find the simple predicate. And it'll take you about 20 minutes. So I will just point out that this is what you're looking for right here. Carl Lewis made only a few appearances in races. That's the whole point of this sentence, but we have all this preamble at the beginning and all this other explanation at the end. And so I would just tell you that, if you have these really complex sentences, sometimes the understanding, the point that you're trying to make will be lost in all these extra words. So sometimes the better thing to do is to break it up into its simplest components, and that way the reader is understanding everything that you're trying to put out there when it comes to your sentences. Related to that, sometimes students finish their essay and the next step is to pull out their thesaurus and to replace every smaller word with a bigger, more interesting word. And I think it does help to some extent, and in other ways, rather distracting. So you see here at the beginning, we have a fairly mundane sentence. The man went to the eating place. We can jazz this up, of course, and we can go with the gentleman walked to the restaurant. Certainly that is a little bit more entertaining, a little bit more descriptive, but can we be more distracting with bigger words? Yes, absolutely. And we could go with the chap moseyed to the bistro. Now, I would tell you this sentence is absolutely ridiculous. I am more distracted by word choice here. For whatever reason, when someone says chap, I think of someone who's from England, and the person who's moseying is obviously a cowboy. So I have some sort of British cowboy, which I've never seen before in my life, walking to some French restaurant out there. So I am, again, all kinds of distracted by this, and maybe the simpler component is the better one to go with here. Okay, so don't go overboard with that thesaurus. All right. So I would tell you, this is something that I've noticed over the last couple of months. I would say that this has been this year's biggest mistake that I've seen in essays. And I don't know where it has come from, because this wasn't an issue at all last year. And this year, so many students, dozens of you, are mistaking this apart versus apart. And if you're not familiar with it, we can understand, but, I think you can learn about this as soon as possible and understand that apart, two words, is about being together, and apart is about being separate. And I racked my brain for the last couple of days of finding a good way to remember this, and this was the best that I could come up with. It does take me back into the 1980s, which is when I grew up, and we can take a look at this example here. We've got Ariel from The Little Mermaid. She sings the song Part of Your World, where she's singing to the prince. She wants to be a part of your world. She wants to be together in that way. And my other favorite example is to take a look at the Australian super rock band INXS, and you may be familiar with this song, Never Tear Us Apart. If you don't know it, it's a pretty great song. It uses violins and a really great saxophone solo, which is the epitome of a rock ballad from the 80s. Look it up, download it, and you'll see Never Tear Us Apart. And basically the song is about not being separated from the person that you love. So I think about it that way, and that will hopefully help you out as you go through this process. Okay. All right. So in preparation, what exactly can we do to help ourselves out? I have a few things to consider. The first of which is that you could start now. And I think if you do a little bit of legwork and chip away at it over the next couple of months, you won't have to really stress out about it and write an entire essay, on October 31st, when you should be out, celebrating Halloween. You can, just focus on, putting the finishing touches on and everything. And then the other thing that you can do, I love a good brainstorm, is you can list off these topics. You can create a brainstorming sheet or do this on your smartphone. And as you stand in line for movies and amusement parks, which will hopefully be back for us this summer, you can jot down different things that you have experienced that fit into these ideas. Your best days, your worst days, things that you want to accomplish, goals, things that make you laugh, all these other things. And then when you look at the college admission topics that are being asked of you, you can pull out the sheet once again, and you can say to yourself, gosh, the question that they're asking here really ties in to the summer that I worked at McDonald's, or, that vacation I took with my grandma and grandpa, and we were at the Grand Canyon. So I think that will help you out as you go through this process. And then the other thing is you can research essay topics. Believe it or not, a lot of schools will not change their questions from year to year. Every now and then at Villanova, I think we do change ours. We changed all of them last year. We do plan, I think, on keeping a few in place for this upcoming year. So you can always look at last year's applications and see what the essay questions are, or just call the admission office. This is not a hotly guarded secret. If you ask me what the admission topics are, I will happily tell you them. And this is your chance, the homework assignment I was speaking of earlier. Pick one of these as your favorite, and maybe just try to tackle writing that essay and see how you would go about doing that. And I always think that this is actually a fun exercise, and you can see some really great questions asked by a lot of schools. So here are a few. This is a look into the future. It's been 25 years since you graduated from college. You are a successful person, and you've been asked to deliver the commencement address at your college. So what kind of things have you accomplished that would warrant such an invitation? What kind of advice would you give 21, 22-year 16-year-olds who are looking to start their careers for the very first time. I think this is, again, a fun look into the future. I'm a big fan of superheroes and the Marvel MCU and everything along those lines. Write a story about yourself as a superhero for a day. You can talk about the powers that you have, the people that you would try to save, all these different things. I think you could have a little bit of fun with this. Let's see. This is very open-ended. What is your favorite word and why? I think you could certainly do a lot of fun things. I talked to a young lady a few years ago. She told me her favorite word was sleep, and I thought that was pretty funny. So you could go about that in that direction if you wanted to. Here's a fun one that the University of Pennsylvania asked a few years ago. You have just completed your autobiography. We would like to see page 217. This is a fun thing you could do. You could start and end mid-sentence. So I think you could have a lot of fun with this one as well. And we asked this one at Villanova a few years ago, and I think this is a nice comparison and contrast topic. Talk about a book, movie, or other work of art, and how has that meaning, how has its importance changed for you as you've grown older? You can certainly look at, an episode of Pokemon and talk about how you thought about it one way when you were 7 and its significance now that you're 17 or 18. I think there are a lot of fun things that you could do with this. And if any parents are in the audience or any students, who are looking at the University of Chicago, parents who have graduated from there, a very famous place for asking very off-the-wall questions. You can certainly go on their admission page. They list all their questions that they've asked over the years. And if you are given the prompt to write about anything that you want, you can tackle one of the ones here. And you can talk about how do you feel about Wednesday? You can talk about, finding X if you're more mathematically inclined. This one's kind of funny. Dog and cat, coffee and tea. Everybody knows there are 2 types of people in the world. What are they? One of my friends who used to work here told me, a young lady wrote, there are 2 types of people who attend my high school. One, there are people I would eat and there are people I would not eat. So take that as you will. And then this over here, this will kind of blow your mind. The last sentence, write an essay somehow inspired by Super Huge Mustard. I have not figured out how I would do this, but I hope to someday. And then again, this one will blow your mind too. Don't write about reverse psychology. So again, try to pick a favorite one of those or look up other admission questions other schools have asked, and try to work on your writing skills over the years. Let's see. So most submitted topics, I would tell you every now and then a student has told me that they want to submit something that I've never read before. And I would say this is a great goal to have. So to help you out, I would let you know. Lots of students talk about international service trips. Students have talked about sports, whether they've been injured and gone over to that, and won big games. And of course, students have also talked about religious retreats. I am so confident that any student in the audience here could write about these topics and get into many of the schools that they're aiming for. But again, if you want to stand out from the rest of the crowd, just bear in mind thousands of students talk about these topics every single year. And here's kind of my final advice here. I'll try to wrap this up. I know I'm pushing time here, but we talked about being unique in topic. Make sure that your voice is present when you're just submitting your final draft here. I think a pitfall that some students fall into is they have dozens of people proofread their essay. After the 20th person has added their comments to your essay, at one point is it no longer you speaking theirs. So I would ask you to be fairly selective in who you have proofread your essay. I would say have your best friend be a person who reads your essay last and ask them, does this sound like me? And if they can say, yes, it sounds like you are on the right track. And then, write about what you know. Don't second guess the admission office and think that we want to hear about volunteerism and everything like that. Write about what you know, and I think you'll be in a good place for that. And my last piece of advice is that you need to find a love for words. If you haven't done so already, get out there, start reading, watch some movies and TV, listen to some songs, and get that under your belt, and that will help improve your writing. And what I mean by that, if you've ever listened to a song or read a book and said to yourself, gosh, what that lyric is saying to me is really capturing how I feel right now. That is the meaning of life. I think that is something that should really influence, how you write. And you can go about that in so many different ways. And here are some examples. I'll go through these really fast. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away sparked such a huge interest in science and space for me. So, these are examples from me. Not all those who wander are lost. If you love to travel, I think this is something that really captures some great ideas here. And if you like Harry Potter, is this real or has this been happening inside my head? Of course, it's happening inside your head, but why does that mean it's not real? Of course, only Albus Dumbledore could relate a profound idea idea like that. So I think, that's kind of everything I normally talk about. I know I'm pushing time. I don't know if you want me to address questions. I can do that. But
No, sure, Justin. This was fantastic, and it's always a pleasure to how you tweak your presentation every year, and we have throw in some new things, and really throw me for a twist here for each year with your presentation. That we're able to snag you for talking about this essay. I have to be honest, we had questions coming in. You pretty much answered almost every single one throughout the presentation. I have two. One is a little bit more relevant to the time period we're in now. And then Justin, I'm going to try. Hopefully, this won't be a curveball for you. It's a little bit off topic of your subject here, but we're getting a lot of questions about it, and someone from Villanova here with a different kind of application process could possibly answer it.
Sure.
So I do try for the community when I hold these. If it's one common question that we're getting a ton of, while I have you here, I'll try to get the question across. But I would say the first question is, you mentioned a lot about kind of what type of essays to avoid. Obviously, you mentioned a lot about making sure it's your voice. I've had parents that have PhDs in English, and I'm trying to discuss with them about, hey, this has to be your child's essay here. And that's a very difficult thing to have, or having it edited 700 times. And by the end, it's not theirs. You really touched on a lot of it. But I would say the question we're getting here about writing for next year is a little bit relevant to your discussion about the topic. It might be hard for you to answer, discussing writing about COVID, right? And maybe overcoming or persevering through COVID. I've had students that have particular instances that have happened with COVID that are very isolated and kind of change things.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have them a little bit hesitant to write about that in their essays because they think, well, all students are experiencing difficulties with COVID. Do I really want to write about this? So I know it's a very kind of specific question, but if you have anything you could throw out to our Unionville audience about that, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you mentioned some really good points about it. Oftentimes, before we got to these recent years, I often would talk to students about, writing about something that was really significant. Earth-shattering is sometimes the word that we would use. And, what's more earth-shattering right now than, this global pandemic? And so I think the tough situation that we're in, and you do mention this already, is that, this is happening to everybody right now. So I think the tough way to go about this is just understanding that a lot of people are going to be talking about these same experiences. So if your goal again is to stand out from the rest of the crowd, you're going to be right in the mix with a lot of people who are talking about these topics. But I would say you could talk about this and maybe shed a unique experience that you have. You could share that with the colleges themselves. But also bear in mind that the common application this year, and I don't know if this is going to be true for next year, I have to imagine that it will be, there is actually a section that's just related to COVID-19. So I think students can put all of that in there specifically, and students may not love this answer, but this allows you to write about something else altogether in the actual essays. So I would look at it that way. You could address COVID, in that very specific section, but you're not going to be unique in most cases, I would say. We'll do it that way.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And I have one more for you. Like I said, a little bit off topic here, but before we'll kick things over to Katrina, about financial aid here. But the last question, and again, it's a little bit off topic, but we just get so many questions about it at Unionville High School. If you can cover first what is early decision, and then second, if you can kind of speak just to your background with that and any discussions, because we have just a number of students that are so kind of wrapped up in that decision to apply early decision or to not apply. So if you can kind of touch on that, that'd be great, Justin. Just explain what it is too.
Yeah, absolutely. So with early decision, and I'll give you a background that Villanova is in our 4th year of offering early decision this year, and our 1st year of offering early decision too. And if you've ever heard the term of demonstrated interest, that's an idea that many of us in college that we would want to quantify and really record every single time that you interact with us. And it is a really good idea. If a student emails you, if they show up at your events, your open houses, they're obviously very interested. And those same admission experts would tell you that, if a student is really interacting with you a lot, if you admit them, they are very likely to end up going to your school. And I think it makes sense for a lot of schools to kind of use that information as a factor in the process. Now, there are so many reasons to do it and so many reasons to not do it, and we won't get into that right now, but we at Villanova have chosen not to really measure demonstrated interest. And so that being said, we still still want to reward students who want to be at our school. And so that being said, this allows a student to say, you are my first choice. If you admit me, I am definitely coming. And that is the agreement that you're entering into when it comes to early decision. So you apply that way. I would tell you that we would give you an easier pathway to being admitted through the early decision round because you do want to be at our universities. So the one caveat I would throw out, especially in Villanova's case, we at this point are not able to meet full financial need for every single student. So if that is a big part of your process, the financial aid piece, I would encourage you to hold off on applying early decision. But if that's not an issue for you, you can apply early decision with the understanding that if you are admitted, that we'll see you at Villanova after your senior year and after graduation. And I think that can be a really good pathway for many students.
Sure.
Does that help
Yeah,
out?
no, absolutely, Justin. That's fantastic. And I'd just like to take a minute here because we had a number of participants come in a little bit later during your presentation, just to cover a couple of basics, just so all of you know. This is being recorded. I jokingly said that's one thing I left out to our college admission reps before tonight's event here, but they're all okay with that. This is being recorded. We cannot see anyone's faces in the community or anything from that standpoint. It's just up on the screen as panelists that are being recorded. And also, if you'd like, you can utilize the chat button at the bottom of the screen to ask any questions you have as they come in for our different representatives. Justin just covered our information on writing a college essay. We're going to kick things over here in a minute to Katrina Kelly. We had a question come in that I'll actually open up to all of you, Katrina, Jim, in case you want to chime in for this one. And we get this quite often just because it can be relevant to all of you. But I have students ask all the time, the university or the college is giving the opportunity to submit their application through Common App, but they're also allowing me, or they also give the opportunity to potentially do it through the actual website or through the portal for that particular university. Is one more appealing than the other? Does it matter? So, I know usually most college universities want either or, so you're not clogging their system up, whether you apply through the common application or you apply through their particular portal. But if any of you, Jim or Katrina or Justin, if any, you can kind of chime in on that question, because we're getting that a lot in these webinars, and it's something I'd love for anybody to be able to just touch on.
I mean, I could tackle it from a financial aid standpoint.
Sure.
So whereas our university application on Westchester's website asks for your information, like your date of birth and your social security number, the common application does not ask for, it's not a required piece to put in your social security number. However, with a lot of financial aid offices, how we get your Fafsa, it's actually linked to your social security number. So if you do the common application and don't put your social in there, those schools that you applied to, their financial aid offices won't be able to see your Fafsa without that social security number. So a lot of times financial aid offices will then have to reach out to you separately to say, hey, have you done your Fafsa? We're going to need your social security number in order to get that information.
Okay, great. Jim, are you seeing anything different over at Temple from that standpoint?
No, not really. This is actually the first year that we've gone to Common App exclusive, but in the past we've had both our own application and used the Common App. And I can tell you, there's no preference.
Okay.
From our perspective. Although in Justin's presentation, which was absolutely fantastic, by the way, it tells me a lot about my college decisions, knowing the essay that I wrote. I needed you back then, Justin. I think that the way that, like, just the way that essays presented themselves in our own application, Justin, it was all a run-on sentence. It was all one paragraph, no matter how the student formatted it. So being able to read essays in the Common App is really a great thing for us, but no preference with regard to either app. But,
all right, great. Thanks,
yeah.
Katrina. Thanks, Jim. Justin, anything else before I kind of cut you loose here? From
Not at all. I will just say that we are a Common App exclusive. It's the only way that you can apply to Villanova. So that's how we handle it.
All right, great. So Justin, thank you very much for your presentation, and it was very thorough. And I always enjoy it, and the tweaks and everything you mix up every single year is always interesting for us to see. So I'm gonna end up kicking things over here to Katrina Kelly. Katrina Kelly is from from Westchester University. And Katrina, I'll let you do a little background bio for everyone, on your background. And, Katrina's going to be discussing financial aid. I do want to give a disclosure. This can be a very sensitive subject when it comes to finances, and I'm sure Katrina will go into that. We actually, Katrina, we have an individual come in from from FIA, from the Pennsylvania Higher Education Assistance Agency. Sonia McFarland comes in at the very beginning of the school year, and we usually do a little bit of presentation on this and just kind of cover the basics. I know there's even changes from the beginning of the year till now, and I know it's such a hot button topic that we always like to have the basics covered for our families, and if they want to get into specifics, we have different resources through the counseling website that we can get particular answers if it's something very personal. Because I always discuss with families. I mean, when you're talking about finances and taxes from the year before, it gets to be very, very personal information. And sometimes we have Sonia step in on some of that. And we get some assistance from particular financial aid individuals from specific colleges too. So Katrina, without further ado, I'll kick things over to you. And thanks again, Justin, Katrina, and Jim for coming tonight. Again, if anyone has any questions as we're presenting here, just fire them right into the chat. And we have counselors working behind the scenes and seeing how I can filter things for our college admissions rep. So thank you. All right, Katrina, thanks.
Hi, so I'm Katrina, and I work at the Assistant Director of Financial Aid at Westchester. I oversee all the state grant programs and the Satisfactory Academic Progress programs. And like Bob said, so if you do have specific financial questions about your specific financial situation, either relating to COVID or a change in marital status or anything like that, don't put that in the chat. My contact information will be at the end of the PowerPoint, and you can always email me or call me, and we can set up an appointment to go over how that would affect the Fafsa and the financial aid. So I'm just going to share my screen so you guys can see the PowerPoint that I have here. Okay, we good to see everybody see that?
Yep, good to go, Katrina. Thank you.
All right, cool. So I'm just going to jump right into it because it is a lot of information, and I'm going to be kind of going over some things more quickly than others. So the first thing I want to walk you through is the Fafsa itself. So for the 21-22 academic year, which starts in fall 2021 and it runs through spring and/or summer 2022. The first thing is both student and parent will need to create an Fsa Id. So that's your username and password in order for you to electronically sign and complete the Fafsa. This Fsa Id is really nifty in that it will give you access to all Department of Education websites. So studentaid.gov, you'll be able to manage any federal loans held, NSLDS, see all of your loan information, any Department of Education website, you'll be able to use this unique Fsa ID. So this is what the Fafsa is. Students do not need to be accepted into a university before you file the Fafsa. The Fafsa does open every October 1st. So that might be before you actually get your acceptance letter into these colleges. So I always say do the Fafsa as soon as possible and as early as you can, because a lot of times there are deadlines for specific schools to completing the Fafsa, and there are state deadlines too, which I'll get into. So these are the different sections within the Fafsa. So the demographics are just general information about you, your high school, things like that. The school selection is where you'll put in which schools you want to send the Fafsa to, so which universities. Dependency status, parent demographics, financial information, and I'm going to go over these each individually. So for dependency status, this is a question I get a lot. So a dependent student versus an independent student. So a dependent student is where both the student and the parent's financial data is reported on the Fafsa. So for students who have either a divorced or separated parent, I get a lot of the questions are, well, who goes on the Fafsa, which parent? So if a student lives with each parent 50-50, either by a custodial agreement or a verbal agreement, then it's whoever the parent pays and supports more than 50% of financial support for that student. Or if it's not 50-50 in terms of who the student lives with, it's who the student lives with more. So who can be considered an independent student? the Department of Education is really specific. So an independent student are students who are either 24 years or older, a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces, and by veteran, I mean someone who's served active military time. So like a lot of our ROTC students would think that they're veterans, but they're not. ROTC does not make you an independent student. So graduate students, if you're married, if the student is married at the time of filing the FAFSA, if the students, both parents are deceased in foster care, or any of these instances here. There are specific things for a financial aid office may request if we receive an independent FAFSA, some additional documentation for some of these here. So for example, if you, as a student, report that you are married, we may ask for a copy of your marriage license as a student to prove dependency status. So for the 21-22 FAFSA, like I said, you're able to file it as early as October 1st. Now the FAFSA does collect the prior year's financial data. So the 21-22 FAFSA is using 2019's financial data for both the parent and the student. Now that is, the FAFSA did change that. It used to be just the year before, but there was an issue with a lot of parents maybe having an extension to file their taxes or something like that. So that's where they went to the prior. However, that does, especially now with COVID and a lot of people being out of work and things like that, financial aid offices are well aware that 2019's financial data may not accurately represent your current financial situation in 2021. A lot of financial aid offices do have what's called a special circumstances application, where you could talk to your individual financial aid offices about that, to look at what your current financial situation looks like. So if you are unemployed, or in 2020 had a period of unemployment and what you reported on to the IRS in 2019 doesn't match what's actually happening, that's okay. Still use 2019's information when you do the initial FAFSA, and then reach out to that financial aid office to discuss what your options are to get a more accurate representation of what your family's financial situation is. So just for some background, so if you have other students who are going to be in college at some point, so for 12th grade, if you're a current senior, when you do the FAFSA, you'll be using the 2019 data, 11th, 2020 taxes, 10th, 2021, 9th, our freshman students, then 2022. So prior year. So that's kind of like a little timeline there for you. Now, when you're doing the FAFSA, when you're putting in the 2019 tax information, it's always super helpful and easy if you use the Irs Data Retrieval tool while you're in the FAFSA. So it will actually have a link, and it will say, do you want to link your information from the IRS? And it will take you to this page in the IRS. Now, a lot of times it will kick you out. It will say that it's not matching or they can't find your information. 9 times out of 10, that's because the address has to be exact. When you're putting this address in here, it has to be exact to how you filed your taxes in that tax filing year. So if you're doing the FAFSA for this fall coming up, and you have to put the address in here to match your 2019 taxes. So for example, I live in an apartment. When I filed my taxes, I put APT period B, right? If I were to go into FAFSA and I put APT, no period, and then a B, it will say that it can't find my information. If you live on a street and you spelled out street when you filed your taxes, but you put in ST here, it will kick you out. So that's one of the things when I'm doing FAFSAs with families over Zoom or in person, I always make sure have your taxes handy when you're filing the FAFSA, even if you use this Irs Data Retrieval tool, because it's super easy to get things tripped up. Why the Department of Education does that is beyond me. I wish I was the one in control of it, because that wouldn't be happening, but just make sure that you are putting the exact address. So sometimes people can't use the data retrieval tool, and that's if you if you're married, but you filed as head of household, or you filed a foreign tax return, things like that. using the Irs Data Retrieval tool is not an absolute, you have to do it, or you can't file the FAFSA, or you can't complete the FAFSA. It's just something that's preferred because it makes it easier for you rather than going through each individual line in your taxes to put in the information. Using this tool will pull all the information for you, and all you have to do is click next. So once you submit all of your tax information, then you can get the signature page and submit it and sign it electronically using that FSA ID for both the student and the parent. For Pennsylvania residents, on the FAFSA, you can actually link your PA state grant information with FIA. So at the end of the FAFSA on your confirmation page, you'll see if you want to link your information to FIA, which is the PA state grant agency, you can use that. If you don't do that, it's not the end of the world. You can still log into FIA.org, create your account to make sure that your information was sent to FIA, and do their forms and things like that. So once the FAFSA is submitted, what happens? So once you have the FAFSA submitted, then they're looking, the whole point of the FAFSA is to determine your EFC. That's the expected family contribution. Now, when I say expected family contribution, I don't mean that that's exactly what you're going to pay to each university. The EFC is basically a measure of your family's financial strength. Basically, if push came to shove, this is what the Department of Education thinks that you could potentially afford to pay toward the student's college education. So the EFC, like I said, it's not a direct correlation to what you're actually going to pay. So it includes things like your taxed income, untaxed, the number in the household, the number in college, things like that. That EFC. We then take the EFC and we use that in order to calculate financial aid. So there's different types of aid. So there are merit scholarships. Merit scholarships are not based on the FAFSA. So merit scholarships usually come from the admissions office. They're based off of academic merit in high school. So SAT, ACT scores. This year's a little bit different because test scores aren't necessary, and high school class ranking, things like that, if applicable. Then there's financial need-based aid. Financial need-based aid is certain institutional scholarships, grants, federal grants, state grants, work study. Then there's different types of loans, and I'll go over what these types of things are. So for financial need-based aid, how that's determined is you take the cost of attendance, which is essentially the budget. So the cost of attendance for a school includes things like tuition fees, housing, but things that a school might not necessarily bill for, like personal care, travel expenses, books, etc. So that cost of attendance, subtract the EFC from FAFSA, that number equals financial need. That financial need figure is how the financial aid office calculates financial aid. So there's the different types of financial need-based scholarships and grants. So there's federal grants, the federal Pell Grant. The minimum for this year is $639, maximum is $6,345. If you're eligible for a federal Pell Grant, you might be eligible for a supplemental education grant. There are TEACH grants and federal work study opportunities. State grants, so PA state grants, PA work study, special programs, and then there's institutional aid like merit scholarships, financial need grants based off of that financial need figure. So if you do the CSS profile, sometimes the College Board form will be in addition to the FAFSA. That does have a cost associated, so some schools may use a CSS profile, some schools don't. Then there are different types of loans. So for the federal loans, the amount is dictated, one, by your how many credits you've attained. So for first year, never attended college students, the maximum that you can get in a federal subsidized student loan is $3,500, sophomore $4,500, and junior and senior $5,500. Now, the interest rate is set by the federal government for all federal loans. So federal subsidized, unsubsidized, parent plus loans. The interest rate for the next year is 2.75%. That actually decreased dramatically. So last year, the interest rate was 4.83% for the federal loans. All federal loans have that built-in deferment, meaning that you will not need to make payments on the loan until 6 months after you graduate. Now, how you can be eligible for the federal subsidized student loan is it's an essentially interest-free loan. So it's not accruing any interest while you're in school. When you graduate, the interest rate would be 2.75%. The unsubsidized student loan does begin accruing interest from when you accept the loan. The minimum eligibility is $2,000. The maximum eligibility, the minimum eligibility is $2,000. The maximum eligibility for a freshman student would be $5,500. You can get additional federal unsubsidized student loans if your parent applies for a Parent Plus loan and is denied. You can get an additional $4,000 a year in the federal unsubsidized student loan. So that's the one that does begin accruing interest. So if after you get your financial aid award letter and you still have a balance to the university, you could always do a loan or a payment plan. So a loan would be like the federal Parent Plus loan. Now the Parent Plus loan would be a loan in the parent's name for the student. It's important to note that it can never be transferred into the student's name. It will forever be the parent's responsibility to pay back. Now, if you as the parent have like an agreement with your student, say, hey, when you graduate, you got to pay this back. That's an agreement between you and your student. As far as the Department of Education is concerned, the parent's on the hook for the repayment of that. Then there are private education loans. Now, private loans, interest rates may vary because it's usually based off of credit score. Now, the private loans can be in the student's name, but they will more than likely need a cosigner simply for their age of credit. Now, the cosigner does not necessarily have to be the parent. It can be anybody who is willing to cosign the loan that is a credit-worthy borrower, and that's what the interest rate can be based on. I will say when you are looking at these types of loans, I have seen interest rates as high as 24% that students have got taken out loans for. I can't say, don't apply for certain loans or things like that. But I would caution if you're looking at a loan and the interest rate scale goes all the way up to 24%, I might consider looking at something else. A lot of times if you're talking to these loan lenders and, well, what's my interest rate going to be? And they say we have to do an application. They can at least give you like what the lowest interest rate is and what the highest is. Keep in mind of what that highest interest rate is. And then, fixed versus variable interest. So fixed interest is whatever the rate you get, that's the interest rate for the lifetime of the loan. It's never going to change. Variable interest rate can fluctuate based off of changes in your credit score, changes in the market, things like that. So for your financial aid timeline, so in October, I always say file your Fafsa. November to March, that's when schools, your financial aid offices may request additional information. January to February, so where we're at now, we are starting to send out award letters to our accepted students. So take a look at those award letters. March to April, start visiting the schools, talk to your financial aid offices, things like that. And then that gives you to the May 1st deadline to submit your decision on which school you want to go to. So the last thing I want to go over is some tips for success. So look for free money first. Apply for outside scholarships now and every single year. It is not too early to apply for scholarships, and there's no such thing as it's too late to apply for scholarships. So if you think you've gotten accepted and, okay, well, I didn't get any scholarships, apply for scholarships every year. Biggest things when you're looking at scholarships, a lot of people discount the small ones. So if you see a scholarship that's for like $250, not a lot of people apply for those. And I always question why, because they think, oh, it's only $250. So if it's a $250 scholarship, scholarships can stack. So if you're looking at like a $25,000 scholarship, a lot of times those scholarships are one time only, they're highly competitive, and they may be for only 1 or 2 students out of thousands who apply. Whereas these little scholarships, those 250, those, $500 scholarships. They're not as competitive, and they're usually renewable. So the meaning that you would get that every year, and they're usually given to more than, one or two students. So I always say, apply for those small ones. Don't discount them. Know your deadlines when you are looking at financial aid. So even before you're accepted, when do I have to submit my FAFSA? Once you're accepted, what are my financial aid office's deadlines to turn in documents and things like that? Fill out your FAFSA each year. Even if you don't think that you're going to get any federal aid, still file the FAFSA, because a lot of times when parents come to me or students say, hey, I need some additional financial help, but you don't have a FAFSA on file, there's not a lot for me to do aside from say, file your FAFSA, let's see where we can go from here. So even if you don't think you're going to get anything, still file the FAFSA. And compare scholarship offers with financial aid offices really carefully. You need to make sure that you have the money for school that's going to not just sustain you through your freshman year, but through all 4 years. Financial planning and things like that are super important. And I know from when I was an undergrad, I was terrified of the financial aid office. Now that I work in financial aid, I was like, what? If you would have told my, freshman self that I would be an assistant director of financial aid, I'd have been like, you're crazy. But don't be afraid of your financial aid office. I know it can be scary because it's like, don't think about it. Don't look about it. It's not there. It's fine. Just shove it in the back of your mind. Please come and talk to us. I promise we're not scary. Like, I'm a huge nerd, so I love talking to students, and I don't get to do it as often as I'd like to. So please come and talk to your financial aid officers, because a lot of times, I promise we're not scary. So
well, Katrina, yeah, no, thank you. This is fantastic, and I really appreciate it. Very, very thorough presentation. So I'll start off with some of the softball, some of the easy ones here for you, and then we'll see if we could work into something that might be a little bit more difficult before we kick things over to Jim for the test optional portion of the discussion to wrap the night up. So Katrina, the first question I have for you is, does a student have to complete the FAFSA for merit aid?
Not for merit-based scholarships, no. So merit scholarships, students are reviewed for those upon acceptance to the university. So they're actually done by the admissions office, and those are not based on financial need. Those are based off of your high school SAT scores, ACT, although this year's a little different, and I think Jim is going to be talking about that. And your high school class ranking, your GPA in high school, things like that. So it's not based off the FAFSA at all.
Okay, great. And next question here we have for you, Katrina. Does a parent need a second FSA ID for their second child's FAFSA? If they have 2 or 3 children, multiple children, do they need to have those extra IDs?
That is an excellent question. So the parent actually only needs one FSA ID. The parent who's going to be signing the FAFSA and who's going to be on the FAFSA and things like that. Each student needs their own unique FSA ID. So a lot of times I get, we're married. Do both parents need an FSA ID? Not necessarily. It's whoever is, if you're married, both are going on the FAFSA, only one parent needs to actually sign it. But I always tell parents, if you're both going to be, on the FAFSA, both should have an FSA ID in case one loses a password and you try and get in and things like that. Always have it back up.
Okay, so Katrina, we'll start to get into maybe a little more complicated questions here. So I don't know if you run into this often, and I think it could be a difficult situation. But what if the parents are simply not willing to contribute, for financial portions of things? I mean, is there any advice you'd be able to give for that if you've ever seen that?
Yeah, so that's a lot of the situations that we deal with in the financial aid office. So that goes back to who is an independent student versus who is a dependent student. Okay. So just because your parents aren't willing to financially contribute to your education does not make you an independent student, meaning that both parents would still have to be on the FAFSA. If they're married, if you're living with that parent, or at the time you filed your FAFSA, they had provided more than 50% of their financial support for you throughout that year. Now, if you have a special situation where you are estranged from your parents or things like that, you don't have any contact, either financial or verbal, physical contact with your parents, at that point, I would say contact a financial aid officer,
Sure.
counselor, to direct you on which things to select when you're completing the FAFSA.
Okay, great, Katrina. Last one for you here, a little bit more detailed here, but we have parents that discuss, you're kind of jumping through the application hoops, and you're putting yourself in the running for some of the biggest checks you may ever write, but you tend to not often find out the cost until you get your award letters arrive from the colleges and universities. A lot of times the big part of the discussion is why are there no net price calculators when including the merit-based discounting that's kind of attached to that, if you know what I mean.
So I can't speak for all schools, but I know that Westchester does have a cost calculator on our website that you can actually use right now. If you go to wcupa.edu/bursar, you can actually put in, if you plan to be a resident or, a commuter, how many credits you're going to take, and that'll give you your actual net cost just before any aid is offered. And I know that a lot of times, because it's usually the February is when the award letters come out, and it's from February to May, and it's not a lot of time, and it's kind of like this compressed time to make these big, huge financial decisions,
Sure.
which is why I say to reach out with financial aid officers as soon as you get those award letters, because I love meeting with parents and students when they get their award letters and say, help me understand these. I don't mind looking and saying, okay, well, this is ours. And they say, well, here's theirs. What does this mean?
Sure.
That stuff is totally fine.
Okay. All right. And Jim, just to kind of reel you in here, I know it could look very different from university to university with some of this information. I mean, anything you can add from your years of experience too?
Yeah, no, I would say one of the things to remember as parents when you're looking at expenses, especially for the coming year, we don't set our tuition rates until the summer. Our board of trustees doesn't meet until June to set the tuition rates, and so sometimes we actually don't know what that tuition hike is going to be. We can only give you a guesstimate of it. So I think that's a frustrating piece for the parents. They look out there and they go, well, this is for this year. I'm not going to school this year. My child's not going to school this year.
Sure.
They're going next year. And honestly, we hear you. We're at the mercy of when our boards are going to meet and set tuition for the coming year. So that's a big thing. I'm a parent. I just spent 3 years filling out FAFSAs and CSS profiles. So Katrina, great job.
That's great.
It just made me sweat a little bit again. So, but I'm really good. My wife and I made our last payments, so we're good to go.
I noticed the huge smile on your face now, as opposed to our discussions when it comes to this topic for the last couple of years. Your expression looked a little bit different than it does now.
I always say when I started the process with my kids, I had really long brown hair. Now I look like this. So.
No, that's great. Thank you. No, thanks, Jim, for chiming in there. And Katrina, wonderful job. Always do a wonderful job, and I appreciate it. Very thorough presentation. You're welcome to stick around. For the families that are still in here, we had a couple people come in a little bit late. Any questions you have, right in the bottom, you can go into the chat and fire the questions in here. We have, our last presenter here, and Jim, I appreciate you being patient here tonight.
Sure,
You always do a wonderful job. We have Jim Van Blunk here from Temple University. And Jim is going to be covering the test optional portion of things. And Jim, this has been quite the hot topic, that's come across our questions to our counseling department. And, there's a lot of anxiety and stress kind of built behind this. And Jim, I don't want you to have to speak on behalf of every college and university across the country. But I know you're in communication and have a huge network amongst your colleagues. So I think this is great that you're able to speak for us tonight. So Jim, I'll let you kind of give a little introduction about yourself and take it from there. Okay.
That's great. Yeah. Thanks so much, Bob. And first, let me just say thanks to everyone in the Unionville community for coming out tonight. It's been great. And thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to share my thoughts and answer your questions. And so I'm going to go a little bit different. Long ago, a wise man told me that if you wanted to win over an audience, you needed to be brief but brilliant. So I've got the brief part down pretty good. I don't know that I've ever been brilliant. But a little bit about me, I come at this from a lot of different angles. I started in college admissions, believe it or not, in 1985 at my alma mater, which was St. Joe's. I worked there for about 15 years, and then I went on to Villanova, where I was the director of admission there for about 3 years. And now I am at Temple. So I've had a really good opportunity to work at smaller schools, at private schools, medium-sized schools, and now a really large public university like Temple. And so I thought what I would do is just share a little bit about the test optional sort of programs that I know of and kind of how it works, and then leave a lot of time for questions and answers.
Yeah, that'd be
because
great. That'd be great, Jim.
thinking that that's probably the better way to do this.
Sure.
So test optional, what exactly is that? It's in a nutshell, it's an opportunity for students to submit their applications without sending in their standardized test scores, either the SAT or the ACT, and have that not be a part of the evaluation process for a student's application. So in the past, or in most years, you know, that was a required item for a lot of schools and colleges, and this year it hasn't been. And so that has impacted a little bit the way that some schools, Temple included, evaluates applications for students. You know, I do want to say, if I can get on a small soapbox here and tout Temple a little bit, Temple's been test optional for 6 or 7 years now. We decided about 7 or 8 years ago that testing wasn't the end all be all in the process, and had very little bearing actually on how a student performed when they got to Temple. We found that classroom performance was a far better indicator of how successful a student might be in your college setting than a set of test scores. Now having said that, generally speaking, in the admissions world, the more information we have about an applicant, the better the decision that we can make. Justin pointed it out earlier on about, you know, would you be a good fit for Villanova's community? And that's kind of what every school is sort of looking for in their applicant. They're looking to see if you would be a good fit for their community. And just like you're looking to see whether or not these schools and colleges are going to be a good fit for you, the same is true on the admissions end. So there's about 500 or so schools that were test optional long before COVID. And now there's obviously a lot more schools that have joined that, specifically because of the lack of opportunity that a lot of students had over the last year and a half to even sit for a test score. I mean, I've heard horror stories of parents driving 3 or 4 hours to try to get to a test site, and then the test was canceled that morning because they couldn't get a proctor. You know, no one would come in and sit with, 55 high school students at that time of the pandemic. Everybody was still pretty nervous about things. So we all understood that. And as a collective community in the college admissions world, it was really nice to see some very elite schools decide that they weren't going to require testing in their process this year. So the real question is, like, so what happens to that void, right? You always had, the academic profile of student is always the most important thing that a college will look at in the process as they evaluate applications. Whether you're a really big school like a Temple or a Penn State or a Pitt, or you're a really small school like St. Joe's, a super selective school like Villanova, you're always going to start with that academic component. And for all of us, it's going to be, what is the strength of your curriculum? What kind of classes did you decide to take between 9th grade and 12th grade to prepare you for your collegiate experience? And I think that's always first and foremost in our minds. What was your curriculum like? And then the second piece is, how did you do? Right? What was that? What were your grades like? Maybe your freshman year wasn't so good because, kids, you didn't listen to your parents when they said that 9th grade would be harder than 7th grade and 8th grade. And so you struggled a little bit, but then you kind of found yourself and you got better each year, and that's a good trend. And we look at those kinds of things. But the second thing that we kind of looked at after those two would have been test scores, right? We would have looked at your ACT or your SAT scores. And then we would have gotten into the essay that Justin talked about. We would have looked at extracurricular activities, letters of recommendation, are you a legacy, all those kinds of things. And I think with test optional opportunities now, many more schools are being much more holistic, meaning they're looking at all of those things that I just talked about in their process, much more so than they would have been, before. And Temple's certainly one of those schools. You know, in the past, the academic profile ruled the world. You know, like, did we look at your essay? Yes, of course. But if you were a really super strong student with really strong testing, you would have had to written a really bad essay for us to not admit you, right? Like, honestly. So we could sort of cheat a little bit and really use that academic profile as, you know, 90% of the decision. Well, now we can't do that. And we did it mainly because of accessibility. I think that the straw that broke the camel's back for Temple was that we had a few students that just did not test very well at all. But the one girl could speak 5 languages, you know, took AP courses and got A's, was the valedictorian of her course, of her high school, you know, scored really well on AP exams that were subject specific, but got a 900 total on her SAT. And that's not someone we would have normally taken with those test scores. So for us, it was a little bit about accessibility and making sure that that door was open if you were a really strong classroom student. So I think that's the big thing. Most schools, you're not penalized for not sending your test scores. I know questions I get a lot is, but don't you look better if you send in your test scores? Yeah, I mean, it depends, right? So it'll depend on the school and how deep they'll go into things. A school like Swarthmore, they're going to spend a lot more time on an application, honestly, than a Penn State or a Pitt or a Temple will, right? Because they have the time and the energy, and that committee group is going to really dig super deep into your background and into your application. Whereas at Temple, we're going to be much more holistic than we've been, but we don't have the time to spend on each application. We just crossed 37,000 applications this year for Temple, and we're looking for 5,000 freshmen. So to get through 37,000 applications and being fair to each applicant, you know, we do have to look at it, but I can't spend an hour on each applicant. Sure. You know, every once in a while I do need to sleep. So so that's a part of it. I don't think that there's a bias if you don't send your test score. At least in Temple's case, the students who applied to Temple as test optional students received every consideration that someone who applied with their test scores. So at Temple, I know Katrina mentioned it a little bit about Westchester. So for merit scholarships, we consider you at the time of your acceptance. So we're going to automatically look at you for merit scholarship. We review you for a possible entry into our honors program, and of course, admissibility. So no matter who you are, test scores or no test scores, we consider you for those 3 things. People are admitted at the same percentage, whether you apply test optional or you send us your test scores. You know, they get scholarships, they get merit scholarships, just like students, you know, whether you send your test scores or you don't, and they're admitted to the honors program in the same kind of percentages. We certainly have seen a huge increase. Like we've been seeing a steady increase at Temple. It's over the top for the schools who went to test optional mainly because of the COVID-19 situation. Certainly that's the case, but we're at the point now where over 75% of our applicant pool applies test optional. Now, a lot of that this year was due to COVID and they couldn't get testing, but we kind of planned for that. So I think the other big question that we get, and admissions people will run the other way and hide when you ask this question, because we don't ever want to be recorded saying it, but we can't tell you what to do, right? Like we can't tell you, you know, you could call me and say, Jim, this is what I got on my ACT. This is what I have on my SAT. What do you think? Should I apply test optional or you won't? Like I'll pretend I can't hear you, that it's breaking up, you know, those kinds of things, because you have to make that decision on your own. And it comes with research. right? Like in normal year, you know, what are the averages? What does that academic profile of an incoming class look like at Temple? And it's going to look very different than the incoming class, you know, at Notre Dame or at Georgetown or at Harvard, right?
Yep.
They're all going to look different. And so you have to decide where am I, you know, academically in comparison to the typically admitted student at that institution. And that should guide you in your decision. And I know there's a lot of trepidation. I think for the first year or two, people and counselors didn't believe us that we would admit students who didn't apply, who applied without their test scores,
Sure.
you know, at the same rate. They're like, there's no way you were going to do that. And we do, because it makes us, I think it's made our application process, at least the evaluation process, much better. It forces us to be much more holistic than we were before. And I think that's a good thing. It's a good thing for us at Temple, and it's a really, really good thing for students. Yeah, so I think.
Yeah, Jim, I have a couple
I think they're
questions
the
here. If you
biggest
don't
points, and
mind
I'm
me
sure
kind
you
of
have-
starting
you
to
have a lot of
fire
questions.
some of the questions at you, if you don't
Yeah,
mind.
no, go fire.
Jim,
let's do the
so
questions.
you know, there's a lot of discussion. You know, so if we do gear things towards actually taking the SAT and the AC, SAT or ACT for standardized testing, you know, again, you know, you have a wealth of knowledge here from bouncing around a little bit to different universities. If you can speak to schools that utilize the super score for an SAT, can you speak to what that is to kind of fill some of
Yeah,
our families?
Sure,
in on that?
absolutely. So super scoring just means that if you take the test, either the ACT or the SAT multiple times, we will pick through your subset scores and find the best, and we'll use the best two scores. So for example, and forgive me because I'm old, I still use verbal and math when we refer to the SAT, and I know that's not right, but so if you take the SAT 4 times, we're going to find your best math score, and we're going to find your best reading, writing, whatever score,
Sure.
and we're going to use that, right, as your best score. So I always tell people, and it's different at each school, but for Temple, if you're applying, send us all your scores. Like if you decide you're going to send your scores, send us all, because we'll super score them for you, and we'll use your best. Right? Because we always want to make you look the best in the applicant pool that we can, and super scoring helps us to do that. We never did super score the ACT, but I know a lot of schools that do, and it's the same idea where they'll take those different subject tests and they'll find your best subject test, whether you took it, whether your best was junior year or senior year, and they'll get you that best.
Sure. And Jim, we get this question a lot. I mean, do you favor one test over the over one as opposed to SAT or ACT? I mean, is there a difference from what you're looking at when they submit one score instead of one test instead of the other?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say favor is too strong a word. I personally believe through my experience in admissions and through my own children's experience, that the ACT is a little bit better indicator of it. I think you test a little closer to what you actually do in the classroom, because there are different subject tests. There's more subject tests there.
Yep.
It's just my own personal opinion, and not that of Temple University. For that. But I just base it on my own and my children's experience.
Okay. All right. So Jim, you know, I know with College Board there's been discussion and moving forward different procedures and kind of removing that essay portion to the SAT. There's still availability for students to take the SAT with the essay at this point. If you can discuss, should they be doing that now? Does it matter if it's going to be removed? I mean, any feedback you have on that?
Yeah, I think again, it comes down to research and what the institutions that you're looking for or what you're looking at are looking for. You know, again, at Temple, we never required the writing section, the essay or subject tests, which I know are going away as well. I just think it's hard. You have to balance how much information do I want to give to a school versus this is what they're asking for, so I'm going to give them that. You know, I just think it's one of those
Yeah.
one of those
So Jim,
things.
you mentioned earlier, you put weight on accepting students from both sides, test optional, students that submit their scores. But as far as the applicants themselves, again, if you could put a percentage on it, one of the questions that came in, what percentage of your applicants do actually submit their scores, right? Now, I don't want,
Yeah.
you have to be specific about from 37,000, we have exactly this many, but just a
Yeah.
ballpark idea.
Yeah.
Just,
No,
and again, I know we're
before-
talking about your particular school here at Temple, but
Yeah, no, before the pandemic, I would say we had in the neighborhood of between 8,000 and 9,000 applicants of 36,000 applying test optional. And this year it's almost 70% of the applicant pool. So it's
Okay.
a huge jump.
Okay.
Our normal acceptance rate is just around that 60% mark.
Okay.
You know, like, and so when I say they're admitted at the same rate, that's what I'm talking about. Our
Okay.
overall accept rate is about 60% at Temple,
Yep.
and about 60% of the people that applied test optional are admitted, and
Sure.
and about 60% that is submitted their test scores were admitted.
Okay. And Jim, I don't know if you've heard from your colleagues here. We just have about one or two more questions here.
Yeah, as
From
many
any of
as
your
you have.
colleague, from any of your colleagues or even discussions you've had with the subject area, the SAT subject area test kind of being thrown out the window here. Has there been any discussion you've heard about looking at AP scores or anything from that standpoint? I know it's a little more complicated because a lot of students don't tend to take their AP score or some AP exams until their senior year, or even take a
Right.
class in AP. But
Right.
any discussion or anything you've heard about that would be helpful.
I think it accentuates the first point I made, which is the strength of your curriculum. I think if we're not going to see subject tests, then we kind of really want to see you take 3 years of a science with a lab, and we
Sure.
really want to see you take 4 years of a math, and like we really want to see you take. Well, you have to take 4 years of English in Pennsylvania, but you know what I mean? Like, I think my wife gets mad at me because she's a CPA, but I tell
Okay.
people, like, you don't have to take accounting if you want to be a business major.
Sure.
Take calc,
Yep.
like take calc instead. Like, don't drop those core classes
Yep.
to take very specific courses if you want to be a stronger candidate. I
Sure.
think the stronger candidates are those that have as many years at whatever level they can achieve of those core subjects, because not only does it prepare you better for school, but it does that secondary aid, which is, it helps admissions committees. And I think
Sure.
that's more kind of what schools are looking for if we're not going to see subject tests.
Okay. All right. So Jim, I kind of saved the tough one for last here.
No,
to wrap
go for it.
Wrap things up for the night. So I really
Go for it.
appreciate
I'm
you
good.
joining us tonight. And Jim,
Yeah,
it's
I'm
always a
good.
pleasure, to speak with you with all of your knowledge and your experience. So the question came in, we discussed, you mentioned it earlier, right? Since testing, cannot be predictive of a student's success. What is the truth behind why schools are kind of stretching students thin, and with the time and stress and the cost of standardized testing? I know you have to be a little bit delicate here with this answer, but if you can kind of just touch on that a little bit, or what your opinion, and if you have to cover up your Temple symbol there, we can do that.
Yeah, no, it's okay. It's okay. I'm near retirement, so if they want to throw me out, I'm close. I think that with so many schools being strong and so many students achieving at a high level, standardized testing was always that differentiating factor.
Mhm.
When you have thousands of kids that have a 4.0 applying to your university,
Sure.
the differentiating factor in the past was test scores, right? Like I could say, well, like John got a, $10,000 scholarship because he had a 4.0 and 1,400. You had a 4.0, but you only had 1,280, so you only got 5,000. Like, that's quantifiable, and you know what I mean? And it's
Sure.
easier to sort of, I don't want to say judge, but it's easier to evaluate when you have that's the struggle. The struggle now with test optional isn't the admissibility piece. It's the
Mhm.
merit scholarship piece. It's how are we going to compare those kids who sent us test scores and who didn't.
Sure.
And that's where schools get creative and may ask for more or different things this year than they did in the past. So like maybe a school will say, well, you can apply test optional, but if you want to be considered for a merit scholarship, you got to do these 3 extra essays. And here they are.
Yep.
Right. Or you have to interview, or you have to like, and so schools are trying to be creative in those kinds of ways. The admissibility piece isn't as difficult in the college admissions world as the merit scholarship is for those schools that offer merit scholarships.
Sure.
If that's helpful.
No, it does. It makes sense, Jim. I
Did that
appreciate
answer the
you
question,
being
you
honest
think?
about that. Yeah, absolutely. No, it definitely did. I appreciate that. So,
Yeah.
so Jim, that's it for questions for tonight, and we're going to
That's
wrap
it.
things up here. No, I appreciate you sharing about this. You're pretty thorough with your presentation here and getting conveying the point. And it's a difficult situation. It's not exactly I talk to families all the time, and they start pulling their hair out a little bit. It's not, we can't give you a black and white answer on this one. And so it is difficult, but I think you gave as much background and a thorough description of what you're seeing on the other side of things, which is very helpful to our families here. And, Jim, thanks a lot for presenting tonight, and Katrina and Justin and everybody did a wonderful job here tonight. We did, just so families on here know, we are recording this. It will be posted on our Counseling Center website here within a few days. It usually takes a little bit of time to convert this, but you can check our Counseling Center website and we'll have this up and running. We also are going to be sending out a feedback form. So if all of you on right now, you can see in the chat right now, we have the link to that. And I'll also try to send that out through email for anybody who submitted an email to hop on here to join us here tonight. But any feedback you can give would be fantastic. We're always trying to move things around and switch things around, and especially during the pandemic roller coaster we're in, seeing how we can help and assist our families. So I really, truly appreciate everyone in the community coming out tonight. Jim, again, thank you for your patience here, kicking things off at the end, and Katrina and Justin, I really appreciate it. And thank you to Justin Webb for the technology portion, and thank you to all the counselors at the high school for the time they put in to make this happen and answering some of these questions behind the scenes. We're very, very appreciative of all of that. So we're gonna end things here now, so everyone can start to log off, and then we will we'll wrap this up and close out. And again, this will be on the Counseling Center website. So thank you again, everyone, as you sign off, and I really appreciate it. And thank you for your time tonight.